Welcome, friends. Today is the first video in a series of videos on bad faith. We're going to be looking at a video that was done on the channel Secular Talk by Kyle Kulinski, and he's talking about an article in Current Affairs which criticizes the show The Rising. If you're not familiar with any of these media outlets, can't say I blame you. Perfectly fine. I'm going to try to give some context as we go along. The reason that we're going to be looking at this is not because I have any interest in calling these people out. The media do what the media are going to do, but this is a really good illustrator of the principle of bad faith and just how easy it is for a person's values to become corrupted by being complicit in a social system, political system of media control, etc. So let's get started. So this is the article that Kyle's going to be referencing here. Isn't right-wing populism just fascism? And I've pulled it up here. We're going to read the source text as we go through the video as well. But I just want to give Kyle a chance to start the video off with his thoughts.
Crystal's good. I like Crystal. But Sagar I thought was good. Turns out, no, Sagar's bad. I don't like Sagar. And I think that...
Before I get too much further into this clip, he's saying this is his summarization of the finer points in this article, is that he liked the leftist presenter on The Rising and doesn't so much like the right-wing presenter on The Rising.
Sagar's actually terrible now, and Crystal is enabling the terribleness of Sagar, and it seems like an argument. I don't know whether he explicitly says it or doesn't say it, but I think his underlying point is like the show shouldn't exist because the left should have the left should have nothing to do with the populist right, or like the populist left should have nothing to do with the populist right.
So that's a pretty good summation of Kyle's argument as to why he is personally upset that a writer in Current Affairs has essentially attacked a show that's on television, The Rising. As this video unfolds, it's going to be really clear that his dislike of this article really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the merits of the argument in the article, and rather that he's kind of caught in a really unfortunate position where he actually has to defend the show, and for a number of different reasons. We're going to look at why. First, let's go to the article itself. So, isn't right-wing populism just fascism? This gentleman right here, Sagar Enjeti, is one of the people on The Rising, which is one of the shows being referenced here in this rather meta series of video commentaries. And Nathan Robinson makes an argument here that right-wing populism is essentially just fascism. If you're not familiar with fascism, it's time to get familiar. Fascism is the political system which has defined the post-colonial world. It's often described as the rules of a colonial society coming home, meaning that as empires expanded, their resources became stretched. It was easier to uphold rule in a colony through brutalization, through segregation, caste systems, manipulation of public opinion, than it was to actually attempt to convince people that the British had any business in their country. So instead of allowing arguments about, whether democracy or people controlling their own means of existence should be allowed, they brutally castigated people by race and by class, and then set them against each other, and used propaganda and used other methods of control to get certain sectors of the population on board with this new idea. So, fascism, or this rule of neo-colonialism, is really easy to see once you know what it is. It's an uneasy series of alliances between people who don't really have that much in common politically, all to gain power. Once the power is gotten, then the vanguard party of the fascists, whoever the inner circle of the fascists, they will start doing whatever their original goal was, which is often increase personal power, strip wealth, or implement some sort of racialized so-called solution to their theoretical and supposed problems that they scapegoat to get the people to support them. So in this article, Nathan Robinson is saying, we have Jair Bolsonaro, we have Marine Le Pen, we have Donald Trump, Geert Wilders, Viktor Orban. All of these, I would put Erdogan on that list as well. You could definitely say there are more than that. I won't get further down the list for personal reasons. When you're looking at this list, you're saying, like, okay, well, these are all extreme right-wing in their political opinions. They're very pro-corporate, anti-immigration, pro-nationalism, anti-trade deal. They are generally anti-workers' rights, anti-homosexuality, pro-discrimination, castigation, creating racial and class divides that are very strong and can't be crossed. And all of these points are consistent across different forms of fascism, but the groups that ultimately make up the alliance of the fascistically minded changes everywhere it goes. It takes on a new flavor. So Germany has a different flavor of fascism than America has a flavor of fascism. It's always cloaked in the imagery and mythos of that individual country because it is highly nationalistic, highly jingoistic, and wants to return that country to a sense of its former glory. And when you're talking about a lot of the Western countries, that former glory is slavery and colonialism and domination. So fascism is inherently, in its core, a racist philosophy. Even when it's applied inside of what we typically think of in the West as a single race. So, for example, when Japan had a fascist empire in World War II, it started to commit a genocide against the Chinese. So this is, two Asian countries. We think of them as the same race and somehow think that they'll have, not have racial animosity towards each other, started genociding each other on cultural bounds, on ethnic bounds. So fascism is fundamentally irremovable from the idea of racial supremacy of whoever the group is coming to power. And when you look down this list, every single one of them has that racist element to them. Jair Bolsonaro famously is burning down significant sections of the Amazon to force the Amazonian indigenous people to leave their land so that it can be raised as cattle raising land. Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders, though they are famous Islamophobes. I mean, they hate Muslim people deeper than a Mississippi cracker hates a black man. I mean, that hatred is deep. I am not convinced that any of these right-wing leaders could actually be called a populist, aside from the fact that they promote these anti-immigration, anti-other races kind of philosophy. And why is this philosophy useful to them, even? I mean, this is a world where we all recognize that we're moving towards a post-racial reality. We're moving towards righting the wrongs of slavery. And here these people are continuing to use racist ideologies, racist languages. Well, it's effective. That's what you have to understand. These people are not employing fascist tactics for no reason. They are employing fascist tactics because, and primarily because, it brings them more power. It brings people in line with their ideology. And the people who it's bringing into their ideology, they don't have to necessarily be Islamophobic or homophobic or anything else. They can simply be disaffected. And as an empire is collapsing, there are always going to be plenty of disaffected people. I mean, we're seeing now in this country just the extent of the rot that people don't have access to clean water. They don't have access to health care. They're hopelessly addicted to drugs. They don't have a context of their own lives. They're trapped in a cycle of either misery or escapism. They have no career opportunities. There's no way for them to afford to go to college. They're, horrifically deep into consumer debt, etc. And there are people across racial lines who are in this situation in this country. And it's getting worse. Wages haven't increased. Cost of living is skyrocketing. The inflation rate is skyrocketing. The currency is devaluing. We're still not getting paid more. So we're actually getting paid less as the economy collapses. And so the more that happens, the more disaffected people you have lined up demanding an answer. Demanding, why is this happening? And the fascist provides a really convenient answer. It's happening because of immigrants. It's happening because of, homosexuality, cultural degeneracy, the acceptance of the Jewish values of cultural Marxism. Neo-Nazis have plenty of scapegoats to give you. And if you don't know any better, if you don't understand what the fuck is happening in this country, you'll take any story. You will. Because you need something. You need something that's going to help you understand why your son died of a heroin overdose, why your neighbor is an old woman and no one comes to visit her and she can't afford food and doesn't go to the grocery store. You suspect she hasn't eaten in a couple of days. You need answers when your politicians won't actually listen to their constituents. You need answers when an oil spill happens in your backyard. You need answers when the police kill someone on your block for no good reason. You need answers. And when our society is intentionally not answering, they don't want to answer, fascism provides an answer. It's what horrible, vindictive, mean, false-minded, bad-faith individuals will do to try to convince you to give them your power and give them your vote and give them your money, and they'll fix the problem for you because they know what it is. It's the same problems every time. It's the media, it's the Jews, it's the minorities, and it's the gays. Same time. Same thing every time. Now, as we move forward in this video, I've laid out what I believe, which is fascism is everywhere. It's the call of the political systems in the current era. The writer of this article agrees that most right-wing populism is fascism. And we're going to see Kyle Kulinski desperately try to convince us that none of that is true. We're going to watch a little bit more of Kyle, and we're going to come back and we're going to read some more of the article here.
So basically, what do you want from me? And it seems like Crystal gets it from left-wingers sometimes who are like, how dare you sit next to Sagar? And then she gets it from right-wingers when they disagree with the substance of what she says, because she's arguing for left-wing positions. So her point is like, what do you want from me? And listen, I think the implication of what Nathan's saying is pretty clear. He doesn't want the show to exist.
So we're almost 4 minutes into the video. Kyle has almost exclusively talked about this article as being an attack on the Hill, as being an attack on Sagar and Jetty, and as an attack on right-wing populism in general. And you would be forgiven, I think, if you just listen to Kyle in thinking that the article is just a criticism of the Hill. And it really isn't. I mean, they are mentioned. Don't get it twisted. But, I mean, going down through here, let's see. Okay, so they get mentioned about a third of the way through the article. They're mentioned for a paragraph. This is mostly talking about their book, not the show. And then we're back here to more explanation of why he thinks right-wing populism is fascism. And going back through here, doesn't mention them again. You see? So it's 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs in an article about right-wing populism was enough that Kyle made a whole video, a 20-some minute video, defending the Hill, defending the idea that right-wing populism is real and that this article is nonsensical. And if that strikes you as a bit much, it did me too. That's why when I saw the video posted the first time, it seemed weird. As we go along, I'm going to talk more about my concept of truth, especially in the 3rd video in this series. I really think truth is something that's in your body. It's not an abstract. It's in you. You feel it. You have a relationship to it. And that relationship makes itself known through your body. And when I watched that video and then went and read this article, I felt not in line. Something wasn't right. So he's criticized this article, and we're going to hear him now explain what he says populism is.
Well, populism is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. So it's just representing the will of ordinary people. Now, I would contend as well that when you talk about populism, populism is more limited to the scope of economic policy, economic domestic policy.
Okay. So, you've heard his definition. Now let me tiptoe around this a little bit. It's not true. He says that populism is mostly about economic philosophy. It's not. Everyone's seen a political compass. The little squares. Left and right is economics. Up and down is authoritarianism. Populism is the opposite of authoritarianism. Right? So, if you're a populist, it means you're against the government enforcing top-down views on you. Right? Fascism is the ultimate implementation of a top-down view. So the idea that right-wing populism and fascism are the same thing, not true. But right-wing populists are frequently convinced to vote for and support fascists because ultimately the right-wing part of the idea of a right-wing populist becomes much more important to the populist than the actual freedom and populism part. They oftentimes don't want government interference, but if they're going to take government interference, it damn well better be the kind of interference they want. So a lot of right-wing populists spend a lot of time complaining about the Democrats, the liberals. And when a fascist movement comes to power, it does it by condemning the liberals, by condemning the left wing of whatever political organization is going to take over. So right-wing populists are the first people to get gobbled up in a fascist movement. So it's not that right-wing populism doesn't exist. It's more that in an environment of fascism, can you even see right-wing populism? Because all the right-wing populists are supporting the fascist movement. Otherwise, it wouldn't have power. Because the liberals aren't supporting the fascists at first. They only begrudgingly accept it once the fascists are in power. It's the way it was in Germany. It's the way it was in Italy. It's the way it has been in many societies. The liberals become complacent. They don't push for their values and truths, and they allow the political system to become captured by bad faith actors. It's how fascism rises. It does so right under the noses of the liberals. But the liberals are not the people joining the Nazi Party. They're just complicit in allowing it to happen. You understand? So I want to go back here. So the argument I just made is pretty similar to Nathan Robinson's argument here. This is a couple of paragraphs down in the article. It fails to acknowledge the massive difference between the left and the right, namely that the right's brand of populism is a complete and utter swindle that involves scapegoating foreigners for social problems, while left populism is generally anti-racist and egalitarian. Right-wing populists don't usually care about the people. Trump and Bolsonaro may have pitched themselves as crusaders against the elites, but neither actually cares about helping anyone but their wealthy cronies. Both want to privatize public assets, in practice giving away people's collective wealth to oligarchs. Both of them have been utterly indifferent to social consequences of coronavirus. Neither has had any interest in deepening democracy. They are about as populist as the Nazis were socialist. You can see why I would be frustrated then by anything coming from the left that treats right-wing populism as something good and legitimate. I'm disturbed by the Populist Guide to 2020, A New Right and a New Left Are Rising, which seems to embrace exactly this horseshoe theory that I see as so wrong and so dangerous. The Populist Guide to 2020 is co-authored by Cristobal and Sagar and Jetty, who host The Rising on the Hill. I've been on The Rising several times and have found it to be refreshingly original, has the look and tone of cable news but is more substantive, features guests and stories excluded from mainstream networks, wonderful leftists that you won't see anywhere else are invited on. Many of them are friends of mine. I am especially impressed by the talent of Cristobal, who has emerged as one of the sharpest and most valuable commentators on the left. There is something so wrong about the framework that a new right and new left should be discussed as part of the same tendency, and I think the only way you can present it this way is if you ignore all the core features that actually define the new right. The Populist Guide to 2020 suggests, we both believe in putting the massive working class at the center of politics and advocate for candidates and policies we believe will help accomplish the goal. Crystal is a Democrat and Sagar is a Republican, but we both, first and foremost, are pro-working class. So, this is a really tepid criticism of the show. Okay? He's saying that it disturbs him a little to hear them equate left and right-wing populism when they have almost nothing in common, and when the current political climate, as you can see every day on social media, is left-wing and right-wing populists shouting at each other because they can't tolerate living in the same country as each other anymore. Okay? So the fundamental principle that The Hill is based on, you can see it in their format of the show, is a faulty principle, right? And this is what he's pointing out. Maybe he didn't know fully how he felt about the show, because he did tweet an update to his feelings on the show sometime after this article. Maybe he was just making a different point. It wasn't relevant for him to be more strongly critical of the show in the face of making a larger point with the article, which that seems like the case, because again, they're only mentioned in 4 paragraphs out of the entire thing. So when I read this, in the context of watching the video, I got even more confused, because this isn't a strong criticism of the show. I mean, I've heard, pretty strong criticisms, and we'll get into some of those later in the video. But this is nothing. He goes way harder on Tucker Carlson and some of the other figures on the contemporary right than he does on The Hill. I mean, he almost mercifully spares them and says why. And it's because he's been on the show and he likes them, and he's hesitant to even say what he's going to say, but that he has to. And that is commendable. There are going to be times in life where you have to tell the truth, and it's going to hurt someone's feelings. Okay? And if you don't tell the truth, things get worse for everybody. This is a fundamental belief of mine. So let's go back to Kyle here. Again, keep in mind, I am weirded out by this point. I mean, he's going all in to discredit this article. And at this point, I can't figure out why. Because the article is making cogent points that I agree with. And Kyle is somebody that I generally agree with as well. Don't hear too many opinions out of him that I don't agree with. So this is a weird one.
Who calls themselves a right-wing populist, or has been broadly given the label a right-wing populist. They're frauds. I think Tucker Carlson is pretty much a fraud. Every now and then he says the right thing about stopping outsourcing jobs, or that one time he agreed with AOC and Bernie about, let's limit the amount of interest that banks can charge.
Here's my dilemma, right? The more I watched this video, the more it just kept feeling weirder and weirder. Here he is saying he agrees with one of the most fundamental premises in the article, that the right-wing talking heads are frauds, that they're not really populists, that they're actually serving elite interests by selling false populism to the right wing, right? This is a major point of contention in the article. Serious major point of contention in the article. It takes up more space than his criticism of The Hill, okay? So, Kyle's very clearly agreeing with major premises in the article, but he's got a bone to pick about them beefing on The Hill.
Like, every now and then he'll throw out war is bad or whatever, but yes, the overwhelming majority of the time, he's just taking standard conservative positions, and when he's not taking conservative positions, the rhetoric does not match up with the reality of the politicians he supports. So again, he's saying, he admits, right-wing media figures, right-wing politicians, they're frauds. They're lying. Kyle admits it. He admits that the article's not wrong. That overwhelmingly, he agrees with the points. So why is he making a half-an-hour video, condemning this guy for writing something that he mostly agrees with? So we're going to skip forward a little bit here. Don't tell me you're an economic populist, dog, because every now and then you go out there and say, yeah, free trade is bad, protectionism is good, and maybe we should nationalize wages. If he were to make the case that, hey, right-wing populism in terms of the national leadership, it's not real. There are no real elected right-wing populists. I would agree with Nathan. In fact, I'd probably be pushing that article that he wrote in the same way I pushed the Chomsky one and push the...
So he agrees. He agrees. He agrees with the premise. He agrees that if he had said they were fraudulent and that they didn't really represent right-wing populism, that would be fine.
The Jordan Peterson one. So, but he didn't make that argument. The argument went a hell of a lot further than that. So here's where Nathan is wrong. The idea that the populist left and the populist right cannot meet where they actually agree. And actually, let me establish that the populist right is a real thing first, because it is. It is so flippant, and sorry, Nathan, but it's true, so dumb to immediately go to Mussolini and Hitler.
So, this is the rhetorical trick. He agrees with the points. He agrees that right-wing politicians are frauds, that their positions are philosophically and idealistically indistinct from fascism. Indistinct. And yet, it is a mockable idea that these people are actually fascists.
When talking about right-wing populists, my dude, they are fascists. They are fascists. Right-wing populism is not just fascism.
Agreed. Agreed. But, as you just said, we don't have any actual right-wing populists in this country. So who are they voting for? What would you call the people who these people are voting for? The easy answer, the cheap answer, the answer he wants to go for is, well, you call them conservative. You call them neoconservative. But unfortunately, the Democrats are what we would have called conservative back when our political system actually made some goddamn sense. What the Democrats are conservative. What the Republicans are extreme, far right. And what do you call an extremist far-right movement centers itself around exploiting right-wing populism, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-homosexuality, restoring a nation to its former glory through repressive acts of barbarity against its minorities, against easily scapegoated religious and ethnic groups, against the gays, etc. You call it fascism. It's not magic, folks. It's not magic. Okay? I've been trying to figure this out because when we started as a nation calling out that this was a fascist takeover of the country, people got really incensed. They got really fucking mad about it. They don't like to hear the word because we associate the word fascism rightfully with murder and genocide and racial terror, imprisoning homosexualities, labor camps, etc. And guess what, folks? Whether you want to hear the word or not, all of that stuff, all of it, is already here. It's already here. Okay? It's already here. The future is now. We have been a fascist country for quite a while. Now we have a bit of a republic. We have a fascist republic, so we don't have one individual charismatic leader who stays in power. We have a series of ideologically consistent leaders who uphold the fascist state. But man, we've had this for a while. Okay? The idea that Germany had to put their Jews into inner cities and call them ghettos and police them heavily and keep them in the same parts of town, limit the jobs that they can get, try to limit the amount of wealth that they can build. Well, guess what? Guess where those ideas came from, folks? That's right. They came from America's treatment of the blacks during the Reformation. The 1880s, post-Civil War period, the KKK ran most black people out of the South, and they landed in inner cities where liberally minded white people and abolitionists might actually protect them from the racial terror. Now, if that's the case, and it is, not an if, that Germany learned for example, its ghettos from us. It learned its euthanasia program from us. It learned its racial castigation from us. It learned its exploitation of prison labor from us. Then we didn't become a fascist country. We have been a fascist country. We have been a colonial society enforcing the rules of colonialism on its own citizens. We've been that. We've done that for a while. So the idea, not to mock Mr. Kyle here, but we'll go back here to where he's mocking the idea that this is a fascist nation.
It is a real thing first, because it is. It is so flippant, and sorry, Nathan, but it's true, so dumb to immediately go to Mussolini and Hitler when talking about right-wing populists. My dude, they are fascists. They are fascists.
I agree, Kyle. I agree. The problem is, I think the flippant and disrespectful thing is ignoring reality and telling lies. That is the disrespectful thing. And Kyle is not alone in telling lies about this nation and its fascist tendencies. Plenty of people on the right who are actual fascist sympathizers will never allow that word to be used to describe their position. They don't like it because it points out their racial ideology. They get a little tense. So Kyle, I don't think, is a fascist propagandist. He's not out there telling lies to support fascism. He's guilty of a much more banal crime. He is speaking in bad faith. I can tell you that conclusively because I've watched enough of Kyle's show to know that he's not really afraid of calling people a fascist. He's not really afraid of, sticking it to the conservatives, telling the liberals they're being too weak, capitulating to too much, demanding more reform. He's a leftist. And leftists are opposed to fascism, just like water is opposed to fire. There's no two ways around it. But Kyle is lying. He's making a lie to cover for fascist propaganda that's being spread on the show, Rising on the Hill. And again, we're not talking about the Hill yet. We're going to talk about that at the end of the video. For right now, we're just talking about Kyle. And why would a genuine, committed, idealistic leftist do something as silly as to lie to cover for a show which openly airs fascist propaganda from time to time? Well, let's go back to this article here. Can't find it. But there is a mention in the article somewhere about a blurb that Kyle wrote for the Populist Guide to 2020. And when I read that, and I realized that he had blurbed the book, it actually started to make a whole lot more sense. So let's go and let's read the blurb here. Justice Democrats co-founder Kyle Kulinski. Crystal and Sagar are the indispensable new media stars, raw truth tellers beholden to nobody and nothing but their own conscience. They marry the populist left and the populist right in a perfect balance of outsider wisdom. They're the future of politics, and this book demonstrates it perfectly. So, Kyle has blurbed the book, and in the blurb to this book has directly said he believes right-wing populism is real, and that Sagar is not a fascist, but rather a right-wing populist, and that he fully supports the show. He's called the show out on his show a number of times. The Hill has called him out on The Rising a number of times. Crystal refers to him as friend of the show, Kyle Kulinski. So, this really, I think, is the crux of why he's making this criticism. I mean, Doesn't that make sense to you? Makes sense to me. He's blurbed the book. He's openly supported by the show. Maybe he gets a little pressure when this article comes out, pressures him to go out and make a statement against it. It's obvious that he didn't make statements against the show because he disbelieves what the article said. I mean, went through it. He agrees. So this video, I mean, continues on. He makes the claim that compromise doesn't work in politics, or rather that the article is claiming compromise doesn't work in politics, and he's claiming that it does. Here's a little taste of that.
Take yes for an answer when somebody agrees with you, dude. If somebody says, hey, I'm with you on Medicare for all, you know what you do? You say, great, let's get Medicare for all.
Right. So the argument he's making is, well, it's ridiculous to condemn the entire right wing of the country as fascists when we could work together with them on issues. And yet, we've seen the voting record of the Republicans in Congress when they don't want to pass something on partisan reasons. So the idea that cooperation is something that should be favored by the left is a non-starter, because the right doesn't favor cooperation. You're not going to get blood from a stone. But he says this to put down criticisms that the left should be more ideologically pure or picky, or stop compromising with fascists and letting them do their fascistic things. All right. So he's going to go on here. Now, when that same
person says, I'm against the right to choose in all circumstances, there should be 0 abortions, you go, okay, on that, not only am I not going to work with you, I'm going to fight you every step of the way.
Agree with that part, yeah. So he's saying there are certain things that he characterizes as beyond the pale.
An inch, bitch. But when we agree, why would I say on an issue where you agree with somebody, no, I refuse to agree because there are other issues where we don't agree.
Those other issues we don't agree, by the way, structural racism, slavery, homophobia, violence against women, reproductive rights, all things that leftists are not willing to compromise, and it's just the way it is. No leftist is going to compromise on those things. And so telling us that compromise is the way forward when we know that we have the moral high ground is just not the answer. In fact, it's one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard. He goes on here to say that, Bernie showed us the way forward, and that Bernie compromises with the right, and he takes what he can get. And that's fine. Bernie compromises with the right, and he does pretty good in the Senate. He also has had the primary contest stolen from him by the DNC twice, and he's never said anything about it publicly. So he is more than willing to compromise with people who are ripping him off and ripping off the American people to prevent him from actually making a real change.
Hate this mindset. I hate this approach. I honestly think it's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. Because you want to know why? Everybody seems to understand, or most people seem to understand, when you talk about how the left and so-called moderate Democrats should get along on issues where we agree, everybody goes, well, duh, because you agree on those issues.
So he's going to make an argument here that that the right doesn't really care, that the left doesn't really care about this, obstructing fascists or opposing other people's political views when it's Democrats. They're more than willing to compromise the Democrats. They're just not willing to compromise the Republicans. I think it's really important to point out that one of the reasons leftists don't compromise with conservatives, they already compromised with the liberals before the issue even came to the table.
The fact that Biden would pick a Supreme Court justice that's to the left of who Trump would pick. The fact that Biden would pick somebody like Merrick Garland, who's a centrist.
Okay, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a perfect example of
far-right justices who just happen to break recently.
Court thing is bullshit. Ginsburg has been voting against leftist court decisions in the Supreme Court this whole session. Sotomayor is the one who's actually putting forward liberal policies and the liberal dissents. So just the fact that somebody's put up by a Democrat doesn't mean shit compared to what is their actual politics going to be. If you're not going to address that, if you're not going to address that, you know, we're having to constantly compromise our values just to get to the table, and then say that we need to compromise more to get stuff passed, that's how you end up with this system where nobody can get anything done. So Kyle's playing right into the gridlock of the political system here. You know, and to be honest, the people who are winning in the gridlocked political system are the people who are willing to step away from the table, meaning the Republicans. And the leftists really need to, as a bloc, be willing to step away from the table and say, look, we're just not going to vote for you guys if you don't do what we tell you to do. You know, and you can't get that by vote blue no matter who. That's not how that works.
And there are a lot of people who refuse to acknowledge this simple concept, this simple notion. You're allowed to say yes when we agree and no when we disagree. And even beyond that, yes when we agree and no, and your beliefs are abysmal, abhorrent, and beyond the pale when we really disagree.
I couldn't agree with what he said here more. The problem is he's apparently setting a much higher bar for beyond the pale than most leftists. I think at this point, most leftists are saying, if you believe in homophobia, slavery, racism, it's beyond the pale and we're not working with you. It just is. At this point, it's non-negotiable. We're not putting the cat back in the box. We're not putting black people back into slavery. It's time to fucking deal with the fact that slavery happened. We've set black people free, but we still live in a very racist society, and then we need to clean it up. And any attempts to move backwards in race relations, gender relations, gay rights, it's not tolerable to us. We're not going to do it. We've already taken far longer than we should just to get to the point where we are. And we're not going back. So, I mean, this has basically been the crux of Kyle's argument the whole way through. He doesn't think the article is right, even though he agrees with most of its points. He doesn't think it's right because he thinks it's unfair that the right are called fascists, even though I believe they are fascists. He doesn't think that the Hill should have been criticized in the way that they did, even though they're guilty of what the article says they're guilty of. So I just want to end this on a delicious little clip here. So he brings up the tweet that the article's writer put out a few days later. I've regretfully come to the conclusion that the Hill, owned by Trump's close personal friends, puts on rising mainly for the purpose of trying to trick leftists into softening on Trump and seeing nationalist racists as preferable to moderate Democrats. Let's see what Kyle has to say about that.
It's honestly laughable.
So he says it's laughable that this is what they're doing. And yet, if you watch the show, it seems to be exactly what the model of the show is. It's two people, a Democrat and a Republican, but look, they can get along. There's no problem. Again, all of this is the premise of the book that they are selling that Kyle blurbed on. Okay? The left and the right can get along and we can save capitalism. Unfortunately, the reality is much different. Most of the people in this country have come to the realization they don't want to be in this country with the other people in this country anymore. White supremacists don't want to be in a country with free black people. Free black people and abolitionistly minded white people don't want to be in a country with racists anymore. And we're not going to get away from this problem by denying it exists, by placating people into going back to voting for the two-party system and just let things roll along as they've been rolling along for 100 years. We're not going to do it anymore. The nation has made it clear 1/3 of the electorate's not being listened to. They've taken to the streets. You're not going back, folks. It's not going back. You're not putting the cat back in the box anymore. And the traditional media outlets that have traditionally tried to frame the Overton window to say fascism is acceptable on the right side, conservatism is the furthest you go left, and anyone else we ignore. Well, guess what? That political system has led to injustice. It's led to police brutality. It's led to a majority of this country seeing burning down a police station as a valid form of political protest, folks. Do you ever think we'd get there? More than half of people polled said that they think it was justified to burn down a Minneapolis police station because police brutality is so rampant and the cops don't listen and we have no power. This is the situation we're in. So the idea that the left populists and the fascists are going to suddenly get along, no. Time for that's gone. The time for that would have been 30 years ago, and implement reforms to capitalism that prevented people's lives from getting to this point of catastrophic clusterfucking. We didn't do that. Now we have a situation where the country is literally on the verge of a new civil war. We have people openly declaring that they do not want to be in a country with each other anymore. You have complete and total ideological disconnect from the mass of voters to the political system. And the media figures, like Kyle and The Hill, are trying to convince you there's nothing wrong, everyone can work together. Racists and black people can live together, guys. Integration is imminently possible. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just get along and forget racism is real? Colorblind society. We're going to make sure that everyone can restore the soul of themselves in our democracy and blah, 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 and happy horse shit and a bunch of other rhetoric that doesn't mean anything. And people are tired of it. They're tired of hearing it. They're tired of not seeing and feeling the change. Change is coming. People are in the streets demanding real democracy and real change. Shows like The Hill are quite literally multi-million-dollar machines designed specifically with leftists in mind to try to convince them that all evidence to the contrary, everything will go fine if you just listen to your conservative neighbor and hear out their points. That's what they want you to believe. All right? Now, the fact that I think that means nothing. I've never met these people, but let's hear what Kyle has to say on the subject.
Just saying, when Trump was threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, she was saying the same thing I was saying, which is like, oh my God, I might have to vote for Biden because this is way too far. See, what Nathan did there is...
So he admits that both him and Crystal ended up with the same opinion, which was we have to support the two-party system because of the lesser of two evils. So these are two people who are paid for their insight and political opinions. They can't come up with something better than what every politically unaware person has been saying for the last 30 years. That's the depth and level of their analysis, and they agree with each other.
He didn't like the response from Crystal, and so he resorted to, now I'm going to attack their motives.
No. Again, he hardly even mentions their motives in the piece. He says that they are emblematic of a larger movement of right-wing populism enabling fascism, and he suggests that the presence of a genuine leftist on the show is probably to soften fascism to otherwise morally minded people so that maybe the leftists and the fascists can work together and the country won't rip itself into pieces. That's the premise of the show. Let's not rip America into pieces.
And so now it's a nefarious show, and the underlying goal is to like disengage the left and have the left see, racist right-wingers as preferable to lefties? First of all, no.
There's another little clip in here that I think illustrates a lot of these points pretty well.
To try to make lefties be okay with Trump. What are you talking about? By the way, I happen to know that, because I know both Sagar and Crystal, and maybe I'm not allowed to say this part. I probably shouldn't say this part publicly, but I'm more than happy to say it publicly. There are a lot of contentious issues. The idea that anybody over there is a puppet or has underlying nefarious motives.
He's going to say it's ridiculous, this accusation. I'm not even going to let him say it. Because it's not ridiculous. In the premise of the question, he openly declares that there's an agenda at the Hill and that these co-hosts frequently violate that agenda. And that should be used for evidence that there's no agenda at all. I mean, this is why this video is illustrative of bad faith. And it's the runtime on this individual video is getting a little lengthy. We're at like an hour now. So we're not going to actually talk about exactly how this is bad faith and what bad faith is until 2 videos from now. So tune back in. I just want to say this whole video is illustrative of what happens when a person doesn't care for the truth. Because, Kyle is here saying he disagrees with an article, but he agrees with its premises. He disagrees with the characterization that the Hill sets an agenda for the Rising, but admits that the Hill sets an agenda for the Rising. So, and he's not even noticing that he's openly contradicting multiple of his own opinions in this 20-minute screed defending the show. He doesn't realize it because he's possessed by bad faith. He's not, in this whole clip, he's probably not really being honest about his political opinions. I have never heard Kyle until the last couple of weeks say that we should support the Democrats. He's constantly pushing for agitation and obstructionism to pull the Democrats to the left. So it's a faulty premise to think that he's actually against the stuff he's against in this video. He's railing against a guy who he says is very insightful, has written multiple pieces he's agreed with. He agrees with the premises in this article, but he spends all this time justifying why it's not correct. All of that because he has a good relationship with this show. He doesn't want to see this show that he's been on, that he's been called out on, as a bad thing, as fascist propaganda or anything like that. Unfortunately, as I said, this is a really good highlight of just how easy it is to slip into bad faith. It's very easy. It's very easy to say, I don't want to upset somebody, so I'm just not going to speak my truth. Or, I like that person, and somebody's criticizing them, and their criticism is correct, but I have to defend that person against that criticism because I don't want them to be criticized in public. Right? And these are all different ways in which a person sells out their values, says something that they don't believe, contradicts themselves openly, tells things that other people realize aren't the truth, and feels nothing about it. Doesn't feel, maybe he feels conflicted about it. You can see his legs shaking in some of the videos. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe that's a nervous energy because he knows he's going to lie. Who knows? What I can tell you is for sure, he's not being honest in this video. He's hiding his real intentions. And as I said, I didn't make this video to call out Kyle. I've liked a lot of his work. I even appreciated The Hill when it first came on. I will say my opinion of the Hill did change the more that I realized that Sagar's opinions are detestable. He's openly racist and jingoistic to Chinese people. He is more than willing to signal messages about the billionaire class being bad as long as they're left-wing billionaires. Bill Gates, Buffett, Elon Musk, people who are kind of pro-social reform, he'll say, yeah, they're bad. Soros is bad. He will never criticize a right-wing billionaire. Okay? You'll never hear Sagar call out the Koch brothers, the Bradley Foundation, the Wilkes family, the DeVos family. You'll never hear him mention those people because they are paid and funded to promote the messages those people want to put out. I mean, as the article that we looked at correctly points out, the article writer's tweet correctly points out, the Hill is funded by billionaires. It is a very explicitly pro-capitalist, pro-wealth show. And so anything that they do ultimately has an effect of attempting to get people to soften on capitalism, on fascism, on wealth building, and see it as just part of America. And if we don't want to tear the country apart, we need to accept it. And Kyle does not believe that line of argumentation. Kyle, as far as I can tell, is a genuine populist. And so he's sold out significant parts of his values to come to the aid of a show that's funded by billionaires. Was he pressured into doing it? Did he just feel bad? Did he not want to put his career on the line because he blurbed a book that was pro-fascist? Who's to say? But one thing is for absolute certain. Truth was not done a service in this video. Part 2 of this video series is going to be on Candace Owens. Looking at a lot of the ways that Candace is not honest about the things that she believes, and specifically how she sells racism to white people through her platform. And as I said, video 3 in the series is going to be looking at bad faith from a philosophical perspective and attempting to understand it and what good faith might look like. So tune back in, and I'll catch you the next time.